make sure we have a quorum. We need 8 people. We need one more person.
We're just awaiting the arrival of one more member to reach quorum. Okay, the subcommittee will come to order. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Military Personnel Subcommittee of the House Armed Services Committee markup for H.R. 1735, the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2016. The chairman's mark in front of you is the product of an open bipartisan process. The mark provides our warfighters, retirees, and their families the care and support they need, deserve, and earned. Specifically, this year's proposal continues to refine the Department of Defense Sexual Assault Response Program by addressing shortfalls in the program identified in the Judicial Proceedings Panel initial report. In particular, the mark would require a strategy to prevent retaliation against members of the armed forces who report sexual assault and a plan to improve sexual assault prevention and response when the victim is a male member of the armed forces. In addition, the mark reflects the subcommittee's rigorous oversight and consideration of the recommendations on military compensation and retirement offered by the Military Compensation and Retirement Modernization Commission. Specifically, the mark would require the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of the Veterans Affairs to establish a joint uniform formulary that includes medications critical for the transition of an individual undergoing treatment related to sleep disorders, pain control, and mental health conditions. It would require the Secretary of Defense to establish a unified medical command to provide medical services to the armed forces and other healthcare beneficiaries of the Department of Defense. It would modernize the current military retirement system by blending the current defined benefit cliff vesting retirement plan with a defined contribution plan allowing service members to contribute to a portable thrift savings plan account, including a government contribution match program with an implementation date of October 2017. It consolidates the current number of reserve component status category authorities under which reserve component members may be called to duty from 30 to 6, with an implementation date of October 2017. It requires the Secretary of Defense and the military service chiefs to increase the frequency and strengthen the financial literacy and preparedness training of service members by establishing a more robust training and education program for financial literacy for service members and their families. In conclusion, I want to thank Mrs. Davis and her staff for their contributions to the mark and support in this process. Of course, we are joined by an active, informed, and dedicated group of subcommittee members. Their recommendations and priorities are clearly reflected in this mark. Additionally, I appreciate the dedication of the subcommittee staff, Jeanette James, Craig Green, Dave Giacchetti, Colin Bossi, and our GAO detailee, Darisha Bates. Before we go to consideration of the mark, I want to recognize Mrs. Davis for any remarks she would like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And once again, I want to acknowledge the staff working in a bipartisan manner to help us develop this mark, and I certainly want to acknowledge all the efforts of all the members of the committee. I'm pleased that the mark includes some of the recommendations from the Military Compensation and Retirement Modernization Commission. We have not yet heard actually from the administration, as you know, but I look forward to working with the Department of Defense as we move forward toward conference to ensure that the best programs are being implemented for our service members and their families. Although there are some recommendations that we could not include because of mandatory spending issues, I believe that the committee should explore some of the options that are available to us. Minor increases in copays for pharmacy prescriptions can yield savings in the billions that can also be applied towards some long-awaited and highly sought-after programs, particularly for our military families. The MARC continues the committee's efforts to improve the prevention and response to sexual assault, and I know, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned that as well. I would just add one of those provisions, which I think is critical, and that's providing special victims counsel services to civilian employees of the Department of Defense. They were not included in this prior, and I think it's good that we're doing that. We're also requiring a plan to improve sexual assault prevention and response when the victim is a male member of the armed services. Once again, the Department of Defense submitted legislative proposals to administer changes to the commissary system, to reduce the housing allowance, and increase TRICARE copays. We are not including any of those provisions in the subcommittee MARC, but at some point, I think it is important to think about these issues as well. There is much work to be done in order to reform the military health care system and TRICARE to a level befitting our service members, our wounded veterans, our retirees, and their families. Congress deferred any action on TRICARE until after the Military Compensation and Retirement Mobilization Commission recommendations were submitted. And now that we have them, while we're not including them per se, we don't want to preclude some of the suggestions if it's the right approach that we should be taking. I look forward to continuing the conversation over the next few months and working with the chairman to best serve our brave men and women. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Davis. We'll now proceed to mark up the Military Personnel Subcommittee mark of the H.R. 1735, the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2016. Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. Copies of our subcommittee mark and directive report language were made available and distributed to member offices on Tuesday. Additionally, I want to note that there was an extraneous page included in the mark and 2 pages left out of the mark that were distributed to the members and published online. I ask for unanimous consent to strike the extraneous page 153 of the previous mark and add 2 pages that were not included in Title V, Section 5, XX, support for designation of 2015 as the year of the military diver. Without objection, so ordered. Is there any discussion or questions on the subcommittee mark? Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very briefly, I think it's a fine mark. I want to thank you and the ranking member and the very excellent staff sitting down there for being responsive to some of my concerns, particularly making sure that the Yellow Ribbon Reintegration Program remains flexible and responsible to our returning men and women, and they've done that with very, very excellent language. And particularly you, Mr. Chairman, for the work on making sure that with the military retirement modernization effort that our men and women fully understand what the implications of that are, and that we don't get caught in what I call the double counting issue, where it's very, very easy to think that the continuation pay and the retirement are the same and can really, really be confusing. So I think the language now is very, very good, and I want to thank you and the staff for doing that, and I yield back.
Thank you. Any other members wish to be heard? If there's no further discussion, the chair lays before the members the text of the subcommittee mark for consideration. Without objection, the mark is open to amendment at any point. Are there any amendments to the subcommittee mark? There being none, the question now occurs on the adoption of the mark. So many as are in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the mark is adopted. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. MacArthur, for the purpose of a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the subcommittee report the mark favorably to the full committee.
The question is on the motion of the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. MacArthur. So many as are in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. A quorum being present, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. And without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Without objection, members have 5 legislative days within which to submit written statements into the record. So ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that staff be authorized to make necessary conforming technical and clerical changes and to remove from the mark provisions that would cause the mark to refer to other committees or would result in additional direct spending or would result in an earmark. Without objection, so ordered. There being no further legislative business before the subcommittee, the meeting is adjourned.